Good afternoon. My name is Rochelle Golub. As a Jewish Federation of Broward County board member and co-chair, along with Lauren Alperstein, of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Broward, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this timely program, New Year, Old Problem, Anti-Semitism in America. Our Jewish Community Relations Council is one of the most vibrant in the nation, because we never shy away from difficult concerns such as combating anti-Semitism. Issues come and go, but our JCRC's commitment to fight anti-Semitism in all its forms will never sunset. Simply put, we are stronger together. That is why we have joined forces with AJC Miami and Broward County on this important program. In just a few minutes, you will hear from Holly Huffnagle, AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism, who will share important takeaways from their State of Antisemitism in America report, and we have the same glasses. We will also hear from Mitchell Tapper, Federation's Director of Community Security, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement. He'll share strategies on how we can keep our own community safe and secure. One housekeeping note, Evan Goldman, Federation's JCRC Director, will facilitate a Q&A period later in the program. So please list your questions for Holly or Mitchell in the Q&A box, not the chat box. We may not get to all of them, but we'll try to facilitate as many as possible. And with that, I am pleased to turn the program over to Brian Siegel, the Regional Director of AJC in our community, to share more about their mission and to introduce Holly. Thanks, Brian.
Well, thank you, Rochelle. It's an honor to partner with the Jewish Community Relations Council and the Jewish Federation of Broward County. We hope that this will be the first among many events on which we work together. I am the director of American Jewish Committee's Miami and Broward office. AJC was founded in 1906 and is a nonprofit organization engaged in global Jewish advocacy. AJC's advocacy is focused on ensuring the well-being of the Jewish people, defending Israel's right to peace and security, and promoting human rights and democratic values for all. AJC is often referred to as the State Department of the Jewish people because we serve as global advocates engaging with government officials and diplomats in the US and abroad, as well as ethnic and religious leaders and the media. By speaking with moral clarity, we've earned trust and developed relationships with leaders around the world, and we've made a positive impact on our core issues. As American Jews, we've been blessed to live in a country and at a time that has allowed us freedom and an opportunity to thrive. At the same time, we're witnessing increasing divisions in our society, and compounded by the coronavirus, many forms of bigotry are proliferating at a time when we need to pull together as a nation. In recent years, we've witnessed a global rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric on social media, on school campuses, in the mouths of politicians, spray painted on synagogues and cemetery walls, and on the streets. And as poisonous words impel those susceptible to action, there is a global rise in anti-Semitic violence, as well as including deadly attacks here in the US, in Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, and Muncie, just to name a few. History has taught us that we must confront conspiracy theories and hate directed at the Jewish community and at other communities. It's more important than ever that we as a Jewish community address this scourge. We must reaffirm our values, model mutual respect, and build strong alliances to confront anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred. To be effective in this effort, we have to understand the manifestations as well as the perceptions of anti-Semitism. Having a clear understanding of those attitudes can help guide us in creating effective responses. We're fortunate today to be joined by my AJC colleague, Holly Huffnagle, to discuss this. Holly serves as AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism, spearheading the agency's response to anti-Semitism in the United States and its efforts to better protect the Jewish community. Before coming to AJC, Holly served as the policy advisor to the Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the U.S. State Department, and as a researcher in the Mandel Center of Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. She received her master's degree from Georgetown University, where she focused on 20th century Polish history and Jewish-Muslim relations before, during, and after the Holocaust. Most recently, she was a scholar in residence at Oxford University with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Holly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to also thank AJC Miami for inviting me, and especially to the Jewish Federation of Broward County for hosting this conversation, for your partnership and friendship. So today we'll be speaking about the state of anti-Semitism in America, and specifically what we can do about it. But before we get there, I want to start with the old problem part of today's title. We can trace the history of anti-Semitism back almost 2,000 years, which is one of the reasons it has been called the oldest hatred, this old problem. And anti-Semitism has a long history in the United States. It has an even longer history in Europe. Now, both Europe and the US have come a long way since the Holocaust. And I do think it's important to contextualize what we're seeing now with what was. Thankfully, today, American Jews no longer face institutionalized anti-Semitism, whose quota systems prevented Jews from immigrating to the US, attending certain schools, or holding certain positions. The sweeping anti-Semitic influence of Henry Ford in the 1920s, of Father Coughlin and his radio program in the 1930s, and Charles Lindbergh in the early 1940s, as well as the Ku Klux Klan, that influence really declined, thankfully, after World War II and the Holocaust in the United States, as did anti-Jewish sentiment in general. We also must acknowledge that the American Jewish experience really is unparalleled in the diaspora in its positivity. But in the past few years, we have witnessed the return of this old problem. And the rise was first noted in Europe, beginning in the early 2000s. And for context, this was around the time of the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001, as well as the Second Intifada. And what we saw in Europe was that while far-right xenophobic anti-Semitism still existed, the anti-Semitism of the Nazis, Jews were now being attacked as agents of Israel. And Jewish sites were being vandalized, and they were being vandalized in response to Israeli actions. And it was not called anti-Semitism, though. It was called political anti-Israel aggression or even youthful vandalism. We saw anti-Israel protests happening in major European capitals, where some protesters would actually shout, "Slaughter the Jews." But that was just labeled as intercommunal tensions. We saw synagogues being firebombed. Synagogue, the Jewish house of worship, being firebombed in response to the actions of Israel, which is the nation state. And it wasn't called anti-Semitism. I mean, it might have been called arson, it might have been criminalized, but it wasn't considered anti-Semitism. And as if somehow harassing Jewish worshipers or threatening Jewish school children was made okay. And our AJC offices in Europe, and Brian mentioned that, AJC is a global organization. We have offices all over the world. We were really working tirelessly on these issues. And we learned several lessons in Europe 10, 15 years ago, which I think are incredibly relevant now to the rise that we're seeing in the United States, which has really been consistent at least over the past 5 years, if not the past 8 or 10. And what can we do with these lessons that we've learned from Europe? So we learned the importance of being aware of the problem early and not denying it. We saw in France, for instance, there was a major denial of a problem. And it wasn't until Jews were murdered in Toulouse and Marseille and Paris that the government finally woke up and said, you're right, we do need to do something about this issue. We also learned how critical it is to identify different sources of anti-Semitism and speak out unambiguously about them, even when it's not easy. We did this after the anti-Semitic attacks in Brooklyn, in Jersey City, in Muncie, New York. Even though the perpetrators did not come from far right white supremacist sources, which those ones are often easier to call out, but we have to be honest about where we're seeing anti-Semitism come from and call it out. We also learned the importance of promoting national cohesion around the issue. Anti-Semitism is not just an issue, a problem for Jews to solve. It really is an issue for all Americans, and not just for the government, but for everyone. And again, that was a downfall really in the French case. Many French citizens saw it as a government issue or a law enforcement issue or a Jewish issue. And no, it's a French issue. Anti-Semitism in America is an American issue. We all need to be part of fixing the problem. And a final lesson that we learned was that our efforts need to be sustained. There aren't quick fixes to this. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic answer that's going to just erase anti-Semitism. But we have to really look at the larger problem. Conferences, statements, even guards in front of synagogues, those are all important. And we saw this in the French case, in the German case, and in the Belgian case, but they're not going to fix the problem itself. And we really need that sustained effort. And then I think the final lesson, and this is a more practical lesson that we really learned from the European experience, was the importance of survey data. So in 2012, and again in 2018, the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency conducted surveys on European Jews. What do European Jews think about anti-Semitism in Europe, in their country? What's happening? Have they thought about leaving because of anti-Semitism? So the EU understood finally that there was a problem, and they wanted to know what was going on. And here in the United States, American Jews have been surveyed about many, many things. And AJC assumed that there had already been a survey about just anti-Semitism. But as of 2019, we found that there really had not been, at least one that tracked this most recent rise. So 1 year after the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, which was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in United States history, AJC conducted that survey. And the results were eye-opening. We knew then that Pittsburgh was a wake-up call for American Jews to rising levels of anti-Semitism in the United States. But this past year, 2020, so 2 years after the Pittsburgh attack, we asked a different question. Was Pittsburgh a wake-up call for all Americans? What does the general public think about anti-Semitism? Are they aware of the increase? Do they even know what anti-Semitism is? You see, we wanted to be able to ascertain both how American Jews are feeling about anti-Semitism in America simultaneously with what the US general public knew, and to understand, is there a gap? What are we missing? And the results of those questions was this first of its kind report of which I will now share the highlights of our findings with you. So bear with me as I share my screen. On the first slide. Let's see. 1 second as I slideshow from the beginning. Perfect. Sorry about that. So this is the first opening slide, and this is our survey. I won't spend too much time here. This is our methodology, but the one thing I want to say is that if you look over here to where it says Jewish American survey, this is the number of people that are part of the survey. We wanted to get 1,000 people. We wanted to have 1,000 American Jews respond to what they're thinking about anti-Semitism in America. We got 1,334. And to date, this is actually the largest sample size conducted by an American Jewish organization. So we're really proud that we have this many people responding to our questions. If any of you have questions, again, on methodology, on numbers, on demographics, please put them in the question and answer section of the Zoom feature, and we'll answer them at the end. So what were the top findings of this report? We found that Nearly 9 in 10 American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is a problem in the US today, with 37% saying it's a very serious problem. That was the first big highlight. Maybe it's a low light, but this is what we were finding. 90% of American Jews thinking anti-Semitism is a problem today. We also found that 8 in 10 American Jews, 82%, believe that anti-Semitism has increased in the past 5 years, with 43% saying it's increased a lot in the past 5 years. We also discovered that more than 1 in 3 American Jews have been the targets of anti-Semitism, both online and offline, in the last 5 years. This percentage is actually 37%. 37% of American Jews have experienced some form of anti-Semitism in the last 5 years. Now, I should note that this 37% is not, physical attacks. It's a variety of different types of anti-Semitism. Physical attacks were about 3%. 3% of American Jews had experienced some kind of harmful physical attack. 22% of this number was from online, anti-Semitic attacks online and or on social media. And so this was really the first year that we did a deeper dive into how American Jews were experiencing anti-Semitism on social media. And as you can see, I think the numbers here also do reflect the platforms that American Jews are using. Now, and I should say, when I say American Jews, I'm just referring to American Jewish adults. So those over 18. I do think that, and this is one of our goals at AJC, we're going to be doing hopefully a study of younger American Jews as well. I think the number, for instance, on TikTok, a platform that is used by Gen Z, millennials, this number would be much higher, for instance, if we had looked at younger American Jews. But we found that 62% of American Jews have experienced anti-Semitism on Facebook in the last 5 years, 33% on Twitter, 12% on Instagram, 10% on YouTube, et cetera. Now, one big takeaway from this is that we then had a follow-up question, and we said, did you report it? You experienced anti-Semitism on these platforms. Did you report it? And many did, about 75, reported it, 75%. But of those who reported it, we asked, did you get an answer? Did the tech companies, did the platforms respond? Did you, was your issue resolved? And 46%, nearly half of American Jews who'd experienced anti-Semitism online and reported it, said no, nothing was done. And so one thing that we do at AJC, and this is how the data really does drive our advocacy, is, we have relationships with these major tech platforms. And I speak with Facebook, I'm working with TikTok, like we're connecting, on a weekly and a monthly basis, and being able to share that American Jews are reporting anti-Semitism, and yet there's this gap in the report being taken care of. So that's really important, and we can actually share the survey data with these other interlocutors on these tech platforms. We also found that 1 in 4 American Jews have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify them as Jews over the past 2 years. This was a question that we pulled from the survey in Europe. The survey that was done in Europe in 2012 and 2018 had a similar number. I think we felt that here in America, it wouldn't be as high of a percentage, as 25% of American Jews have actually avoided, wearing a kippah or wearing a Jewish Star of David necklace, anything that would identify them as Jewish. And so this is an unfortunate number to see, I think, especially here in America. But these numbers are really relevant when we have something to compare them to. They're interesting on their own, but it's important to say, is this getting better or is this getting worse? And that was really what our 2020 survey has allowed us to do, is that we had data from 2019. There was some debate of, do we do another survey in 2020? Only a year has passed, and I think the answer was a lot has happened in 2020. We do need to do another survey. So this is an interesting comparison when we talk about trend data. Do you ever avoid certain places, events, or situations out of concern for your safety as a Jew? In 2019, that number was 25%. So 1 in 4 American Jews have avoided certain places or events out of their concern for their safety. That number jumps to almost 1 in 3 in 2020. So in 2020, 31% of American Jews said that they had avoided certain places, events, or situations out of their fears, for their safety as someone who is Jewish. So again, this is a trend that's getting worse, and that's really important as we're measuring what's happening in America. Now, one question I receive in my work as U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism, especially working I work with many non-Jews as well, is this is all the information I just shared with you is really interesting, they'll ask, but this is just perceptions. This is a fear. How do we really know that, American Jews, what they're feeling is actually really happening? And, I say, well, I'm glad you asked, because we do have FBI data, which corroborates with how Jews are feeling with our perception survey data. And in 2020, November, just a couple months ago, the FBI released its 2019 hate crime statistic report, finding that 60.2% of all religious bias crimes in America target Jews, Jews make up 2%, less than 2% of the population, and yet 60.2% of all religious bias crimes target Jewish Americans. And again, this comes to the trend data. This isn't our data. This is the FBI's reports. You can look at 2018 for Jewish victims of hate crime. You can look at anti-Jewish offenses and incidents, and you can compare 2018 again with 2019, and you can see this rise as well. And that's really important to show that how Jews are feeling really does align with the data. The second major part of our report, and I alluded to this earlier, was our ability to, for the first time, to really compare how American Jews see anti-Semitism with how the general public sees anti-Semitism. And there were some really interesting findings here. So again, we asked, is anti-Semitism a problem in America today? We found that, again, 88%, 9 in 10, that was that 9 in 10 number, that opening slide, said that yes, American Jews said yes, it's a problem. 63% of Americans said it was a problem, which, I think it's good. There's a majority of Americans. I think something that might be a little more concerning is the 33% of Americans who said that no. 1 in 3 Americans are saying no, anti-Semitism is not a problem in the United States today. We asked the same question to both groups again about if anti-Semitism has increased or decreased in the past 5 years. Again, 8 in 10 American Jews say that it's increased. Half of that number, though, only 4 in 10 Americans were aware or believed that anti-Semitism increased in America, which means that 57% said that it had either stayed the same or decreased. And we know that number for decreased right here is 14%. So again, there's something, this lack of awareness, something's missing here. There is a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a divergence. One of the most interesting revealing findings for me was our very first question that we asked the U.S. general public respondents. We asked them, and at first we weren't even going to ask this question, but we were like, we should see what Americans know, if they even know the term anti-Semitism. And we found that 46%, nearly half of Americans, are not really familiar with the term anti-Semitism. So 21% have actually never heard the term before at all. So 1 in 5 Americans have never heard the word anti-Semitism. And 25%, so 1 in 4, they've heard of it, but they weren't sure what it meant. And so again, when we talk about, raising awareness, showing our issues, why they're important, why it's an important American problem to solve. It's about our democracy, our democratic values, the safety for all Americans, really. This is kind of where we need to start. It really is an educational awareness raising campaign. Now, we did explain what anti-Semitism was. We mentioned it being, hostility toward Jews before we asked those next questions about whether it was a problem or if it had risen. So everyone who was participating in our survey did proceed answering all of the questions. And I think that's important, that just because they never heard the term in this first question did not mean that they didn't continue with the other questions in the survey. This was another interesting piece of another highlight of our findings. We did ask some questions as anti-Semitism can relate to Israel. And we weren't surprised by the number of American Jews who believed that the statement, we asked the statement, if someone says Israel has no right to exist, do you believe that's anti-Semitic? 85% of American Jews said, yes, if someone says Israel has no right to exist, that's an example of anti-Semitism. We expected that number, 85, 90, and that's usually the number we get with these kinds of questions. What we were surprised with, actually pleasantly surprised with, was the 74%, this number of the US general public. We found that 3/4 of Americans also agree, also believe that when you say Israel has no right to exist, which again is a key tenet of anti-Zionism, that is an example of anti-Semitism. So again, that's really helpful when we understand, like, this is not just necessarily a Jewish issue or a Jewish understanding, that the broader American public sees this in this light as well. Some of the other statements that we asked related to Israel had a little bit more of a divergence, and we can see this here. So that first one was the slide I just showed you, Israel has no right to exist. You can see that's much more of a close comparison, 85% to 74%. The other two we asked, one was about money in Israel. The other was about dual loyalty, the charge of dual loyalty. So to the statement, the US government only supports Israel because of Jewish money. We found that 84% of American Jews said that's an example of an anti-Semitic statement. 55% of the general public also believed that it was. And to the question about dual loyalty, American Jews are more loyal to Israel than to America. 76%, so 3/4 of American Jews said that was an example of anti-Semitism, whereas 50% of the US general public said that it was. So again, there's a little bit more of a divergence on those latter two statements. So that was some highlights. There's a lot more data, a lot more data. I just shared a few kind of big takeaways, and we'll make sure we share with you the actual link so you can see the entire report. You can see what just American Jews think about a whole host of issues in addition to anti-Semitism, what the US public thinks about anti-Semitism, and then you can see the comparison data all on our website. So we'll make sure to be able to share that with you as well. But this is kind of where I want to kind of bring at least my part of our conversation to a close. And this is really what we can do about it. There's we know what's going on. We know what's around us. We see it. We feel it. We read the FBI reports. We see the increased security at our synagogues and at Jewish institutions. And so the other big question is, well, what can we really do? What can we do about it? And I mentioned that there's no silver bullet. There's no one way, but there's multiple ways. And really these different prongs, a multi-pronged approach, a multi-pronged strategy really kind of needs to be enacted in order to push back against anti-Semitism, in part because it's so complex today. There's many different sources, as we know, and we really need a multi-pronged strategy. So this is kind of the new year part. So it was a new year, old problem. That was the title of our today's program. We talked a little bit about the old problem, the resurgence of the old problem. So what can we do about this old problem in 2021? And this is a list of 5. It's not comprehensive, but it's an important start. And so the first piece here is educate. And I can't stress this enough. I think our survey really showed that there's this lack of awareness amongst Americans about what is anti-Semitism. And so we really need to work towards defining anti-Semitism, giving examples of what anti-Semitism looks like in the 21st century. AJC, we use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a working definition of anti-Semitism, which is an educational tool. It's a resource to be used, of course, in context to determine what could be anti-Semitic in effect, I should add. And the other piece on education is, what does anti-Semitism look like today? What it looks like today in the 21st century, especially online, is very different than it looked even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. And I think there's a lack of awareness definitely amongst the general public about these different tropes, these terms, many of these tropes actually being reused and recycled from the medieval ages and given new life in the digital realm. And so AJC has actually created a resource called Translate Hate. It's a glossary of anti-Semitic terms and tropes that we can also share with you. The second is speaking out, again, making public statements, participating in coalitions. I can't stress this enough. Working with non-Jews, interfaith, interreligious groups to push back against not just anti-Semitism, but all forms of hate and bigotry. and especially now in our country, really working to restore civility in the public discourse through these discussions. The third is report. Again, we know that there's a lot of underreporting that happens, especially with anti-Semitism. Our survey did find, at least with actual physical incidents and verbal incidents, that American Jews, 76% actually did not report to law enforcement. They felt that the issue that they experienced wasn't important enough. And that kind of speaks to the normalization of the problem, when you don't feel like it rises to being important to reporting it, or they felt like nothing would be done about it. And that speaks to the resignation and the fight against anti-Semitism, when we feel like that the law enforcement might not take the complaint seriously enough. And that's also a problem. Our next speaker will talk about that a lot more than I will. The fourth is advocating against supporting measures which improve Jewish community security, including hate crimes legislation. And the last is, again, providing support and resources, whether it be funding for Jewish community needs. And AJC, really, we work with reporting, we work on education, we work on speaking out, definitely the advocacy. And again, we will be able to share with you the different initiatives that we're currently advocating in front of members of Congress right now, even the new members of Congress, as the next session has just started on Sunday on these issues to better protect Jewish communities around the world. So these are important steps. I think they're general. And I actually want to move now to our next speaker, Mitchell Tapper, who is the Community Security Director of the Federation, because he'll be able to present more detailed instructions of what to do when you encounter anti-Semitism and how to report it. So I will stop sharing my screen, and Mitchell, I will yield the floor to you to take on the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. That was very enlightening and interesting. Hi, my name is Mitchell Tapper. As previously stated, I am the Director of Community Security for the Jewish Federation of Broward County. I have 30 years of diversified law enforcement experience, both at the local level in New York City and at the federal level in New York and Florida. Let me start by saying that I have a short period of time, so this is not going to be a training, although for those of you in Broward County, I do offer training. I do get a little philosophical, so I'm going to share something with you that I am quite passionate about, as you'll notice in a second. Stand by. Here we go. Okay, I am passionate about the Twilight Zone. And there are 4 quotes I'm going to share with you rather quickly, all of which have something to do with prejudice. So I'm not going to read them verbatim. The site, as far as which episode it is, I find them all profound. And every time I see these episodes, it kind of brings goosebumps to me. As you can see, found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill. Prejudice, not everything is violent, as Holly has said. Next one, sorry. This was an episode having to do with a Nazi captain that went back to visit, to reminisce, I should say, to visit one of the concentration camps. And as you can see, prejudice, into it, they shoveled all of their reason, their logic, their knowledge. Okay, then we become, if we don't get rid of the prejudice, we become the grave diggers. Next, this had to do with an episode having to do with someone who was a neo-Nazi supporter. Mind you, these were all filmed in the 1960s, okay? And here we are in 2021. What's changed? This had to do with a neo-Nazi supporter who believed he was seeing the ghost of Hitler. And it's called He's Alive, okay? And the moral of this is, remember when you hear a name called, a minority attacked, any blind, unreasoning assault on people or any human being. He's alive through the things, because we keep him alive, or those that have prejudice keep him alive. Lastly, a sickness known as hate. This one is even more appropriate now than ever because it talks about the sickness in hate. It's not a virus, it's not a microbe, okay? But it is a sickness nonetheless. Okay, let me stop sharing this for a second and let me go back to what I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, let me talk to you about the Security Director Program. Out of approximately 140 some odd federations, Jewish federations in the United States, probably in excess of 50 or 60 at this point have a Jewish community security director who comes from either former law enforcement or the intelligence community. Our jobs are not only directly related, depending on, in my case, I have a 44-acre campus. I manage security on the campus, but I consult with the whole Jewish community of Broward County. We reach out. We send out alerts. We send out information involving things that I might get from law enforcement. I am in touch with local, state, and federal partners on a regular basis. I get a myriad of intelligence. Some of it's redundant. Unfortunately, and I stress this word, unfortunately, I read a great deal of anti-Semitism all over the country and all over the world for that matter. Every day, some result in investigations, some result in arrests, which is good, but nonetheless, it exists. So the Security Director Program was designed to have a liaison between the Jewish community and law enforcement and to assist you based on our training and experience, the ability to help prevent or recover from attacks such as anti-Semitism. One of the ways that that's done is through training. So we and myself offer training such as active threat, active shooter training. All you have to do is get in touch with me and we can arrange to have an active threat training at your facility, with groups of your congregants or schools. I want to stress that in the post-attack analysis on the Tree of Life Synagogue, many of the people there, because we've spoken, the security director from the Tree of Life, who was then the security director, now he's a national security advisor to the Secure Community Network. He had coincidentally done training there shortly before the attack, and the training that they received in active threat actually saved lives. So yes, it was the worst attack, a Jewish attack in America, but nonetheless, many lives were saved. So train, and just because you train once doesn't mean you shouldn't do it again. It's repetitive, muscle memory. Site assessments. I am free to assist you in Broward County anyway with site assessments. The DHS security grant is coming up for certain Jewish schools. There are state grants available for security upgrades, the cameras, access control, intercoms, bulletproof glass, gates, fences. All these things can fall under security grants. And, I have found a lot of times when it comes to congregations, they shrug their shoulders and go, well, what should I do? Well, we take a look. Your local police department usually has an officer that will offer you a site assessment. The site assessment is necessary as part of the application process for the Department of Homeland Security security grant. And whether it's me or whether it's the local police department, you need to have a secure site assessment done. Either way, I am there to help you do this. And I urge you that if you haven't applied for the grant before, or if you have and you have gotten turned down, please, by all means, apply for it again. You have to come up with a list of things that you want to do based on certain categories. Too lengthy to get into at this moment. But I'm going to go back to sharing my screen because I want to have one more. All right, when I do a more extensive security training, one of the slides I put up is this. Every employee, no matter what position, does two things. Okay. And this is true whether you're in a Jewish day school, whether you're in a preschool, whether you're in a synagogue. It's not left to the rabbi. It's not left to the executive director. It's not left to the temple president. Okay. Everybody does two things. If you're walking through your synagogue and you see dirt on the floor, I mean, you know, you bend down, you pick it up, you throw it in the trash. All right. That's one job. The other job is security. Okay. Everybody needs to be part of the team. Everybody. And by the way, I didn't say this. This came from Walt Disney. And the last thing I want to share with you is, I know you've heard this before. If you see something or hear something or become aware of something, say something. Please say something. I'd rather have someone tell me that they think they saw a swastika painted nearby, or they think they saw something, or they saw a suspicious person. Security is everybody's responsibility, everybody's. On that note, I'm going to introduce Evan Goldman. Evan is our JCRC director and a good friend and colleague. And Evan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mitchell, and thank you, Holly, and most importantly, thanks to each of you for taking time out of your day to join us for a very, very important topic. We have a number of questions, and the first is for Holly and I think and Mitch. We're coming off a contentious election. Talk about the factors that have led to the rise in anti-Semitism in our nation, and if it is your expectation that this trend will continue under a new administration.
Mitchell, I'll start with at least a 30,000-foot view
Okay.
of kind of reasons for the rise, and maybe what you're seeing on the ground. You can please jump in. That's another question I receive all the time. Why the rise of anti-Semitism? What's happening? Why now? And I mean, there's several factors, and I think all of them at once is really contributing to what we're seeing. So, and again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just a few. One of the reasons for the current rise in anti-Semitism is not just in the United States, but also globally, economic uncertainty. There's a long history, again, of blaming Jews when there's economic woes. That's one reason. A second reason is unfortunately, a growing lack of confidence in liberal democracies. And I don't mean liberal as in versus conservative, but like versus illiberal. So, we're an example of we're a republic, but we're also a liberal democracy. And growing lack of confidence in government's ability to govern. Jews have often been blamed for this. So that's the reason. Another reason is a growing emphasis on race and national identity. That is something that we've seen in this country, especially in the last 5 years, but also in other countries as well, internationally. We know in Europe, especially 2015 to 2016, with many refugees coming from the Middle East into Europe, there was a real uptick in white nationalism, white supremacism in European countries as well. A fourth reason, again, this doesn't justify anti-Semitism, but it's a reason for why it's rising is a fading legacy of the Holocaust. I mean, we know from survey data that many young people in America, but also around the world, don't know where unchecked anti-Semitism can lead. And so that unfortunately is a factor. A fifth reason is a deepening polarization between the political left and the political right about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and maybe just a deepening polarization in our society in general. A couple more, because again, it's not a full list, but a couple more. One is the internet and social media. I can't stress this enough, actually. 10 years ago even, the social media platforms where we see the most anti-Semitism now really didn't exist to the extent that they do now. I was just reading yesterday that Facebook, there's almost 3 billion users on Facebook each month, which is just, I mean, it's unfathomable to me to think about how much content people are able to share. And we know that fear, anti-Semitism, anxiety, like lies, that spreads so much fast, 6 times faster, actually. It spreads 6 times faster than truth. And that's a big thing that we have to deal with in the fight against anti-Semitism. And a last reason for the rise is the different sources today. I mean, it's not just from the far right. We have it from the far left. We have anti-Semitism from Islamist extremists. We have it from religious extremists in general. And it looks, and it's all happening at the same time. And I think that complexity needs to be part of the conversation as to why it's rising today.
I don't know how to top Holly's answer, but let me add a couple of things. I was on a cruise ship once with my family and ran into a Jewish ship employee. And without getting into a lot of detail, we were just talking. And this is long before I retired from the government. And he had once mentioned that on a different ship, he had told some passenger in discussion that he was Jewish. And the child looked at him seriously and said, "Where are your horns?" And I know we've all heard this before, but there is a ring of truth to this in lack of education, some form of ignorance, without getting too political, fueled by social media and fueled by the ability to take a message that would have to be mailed or printed many years ago. And now, like Holly said, millions and millions of people see it in an instant. Combine that with just the built-in prejudice. There are people who have built-in prejudice, and no matter what you do, and the further we do get away from things like the Holocaust and teachings from the Holocaust, recently, and I had put this out, recently there was a t-shirt for sale on TMZ. Wasn't selling it, they found it and posted it as an informational piece, and they found a t-shirt that bore similarity to the Proud Boys logo, but was an abbreviation for 6 million wasn't enough. I mean, talk about being appalled by something. And, yeah, it probably got taken down at some point, but how many millions of people saw this and went, yeah. And we have to learn, I mean, people have to learn how to fight that. And that's not even me talking as a security director, being, how do you defend physically against stuff like this? Evan?
Thank you. Here in Broward County, we value collaboration and partnership. It's what brought us together today. Holly, at the national level, talk about how you partner with other organizations, whether it be ADL or other national agencies.
It's a good question. So, AJC is one of, if not the oldest, Jewish advocacy organization. We were founded in 1906. I think the ADL was founded in 1913. We have a long history of working together and working with other Jewish community organizations. I personally, I have some former contacts, former colleagues, friends of mine that work at ADL. I used to work with them when I was at the State Department. Right now, in my capacity, I'm in charge of basically responding to how AJC is working on the issues of anti-Semitism domestically in our 24 regional offices. Most of the partnership, the collaboration between other Jewish organizations is happening at the ground level, at the grassroots level, which I think is incredible and it's really important. I'll also say, though, that I'm also really glad that we're doing different things. I know the ADL does incredible work when it comes to data collection, when it comes to anti-bias trainings in the classrooms, working with the FBI, working with law enforcement, really on the grassroots, on the ground level. AJC, we have really powerful intergroup coalitions, like a leadership organization in many ways. We work especially with members of Congress and elected officials with advocacy for laws to be passed and changed to better protect the Jewish community. And so I think some of our differences are also really important because it speaks to we are working for the same goal, lowering levels of anti-Semitism in the United States. We are all doing it a little bit differently, which is really important because I think the more of us in this fight right now, the better.
Great. Holly, we get this a lot in the JCRC world. How do you respond to the notion that the IHRA definition is used to stifle legitimate criticism of Israel?
It's one of the biggest criticisms that we've received, and I think it's almost been misplaced, although I do have incidents where the IHRA definition's been misused. But just because a tool can be misused doesn't mean that it should not be used, right? And it's been a proven useful tool for Jewish communities around the world. We know this looking at what Europe's doing right now with their Jewish communities. It's incredible how the IHRA definition is being used to train law enforcement, to train educators in data collection and monitors. So, yes, can it be misused? Any tool really can be misused. And I think one of the biggest misuses is when people say, look, you can't criticize Israel, that is anti-Semitism. Thankfully, the actual tool itself, the IRA definition, has a line in it which says, criticism of Israel that's like we level against other countries is not anti-Semitism. And I think even as Americans, we criticize our government all the time. Israelis criticize their government all the time. If I wanted to call the Israeli government racist, actually the policies racist, I could, and that's not anti-Semitism in effect, according to the IRA definition. What is when you're questioning Israel's right to existence or Jews' right to self-determination in their homeland. And I think that's an important difference. And I think not enough people know about what the definition actually says and what it doesn't say. But I've seen it. I was part of the Bucharest delegation in 2016, and I've just seen it being used. And it's really incredible how it's empowered Jewish communities, especially in Europe and hopefully here in the US.
Holly, we have a question from a recent emigre from Belgium who reports that in Europe, they have seen an uptick in Islamic anti-Semitism. So two questions. Number one, have you seen that in the United States? Number two, talk a little bit about AJC's work in Europe to combat anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. Oh, well, this is really important. It was actually what I was alluding to when I opened my presentation. I talked about how there was this recent rise in Europe, and that rise really was from this source, this Islamist anti-Semitic and extremist source of anti-Semitism. We often talk about like the three main threats of anti-Semitism today globally: far right, white supremacist, traditional xenophobic sources; the far left. That could be, identitarian. It could be conspiratorial. It was kind of something that we saw in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party in the UK. And then we say Islamist extremists, and that was as far as a threat concern, and that's what we saw in Europe. In fact, up until Halle, Germany, that attack in Halle, Germany, in Yom Kippur in 2019, that was the first anti-Semitic killing, I think, in almost a decade in Europe that was not perpetrated by an Islamist extremist. That was the main source of concern in Europe. And that's really what our European offices were trying to get Western European governments to understand, that this is a new source of anti-Semitism. And yes, we understand that you don't want to, isolate a community that's facing serious persecution. And the Muslim community in Europe, it was facing serious persecution in jobs and housing and all. But you have to be honest about where anti-Semitism is coming from. And of course, it's a small segment of the community. And we were trying to be very specific in saying, Islamist extremists, which, has the same annihilationist ideology as the Nazis do, actually, if you look at some of their writings. So that's what we were seeing in Europe. And unfortunately, I think it was really late in the day when the governments woke up to the fact that there was this new source and something needed to be done. It honestly, I don't think really was until it no longer affected the Jewish community. When the attack in the Brussels Jewish Museum in 2014 went to the Brussels airport in 2016 and affected more than just Jews, or when the hyper-caché kosher supermarket attacks in 2015 in January went to the Bataclan in November that year and killed, everyone. It was a kind of a war against Western society, Western democracy. And I think that was really that wake-up call that it starts with the Jews, but it's not ending with Jews, when people kind of woke up. Here in the US, when I talk about sources, and I only focus right now on domestic anti-Semitism, although my background was in Europe, I try to say religious extremist anti-Semitism as kind of that third source or threat, because I think it covers Islamist extremism, which we do have in the US, but it's not at all to the extent what we saw in Europe. But for instance, the Jersey City shooting was with the Black Hebrew Israelite movement, and extremists from that religious extremist umbrella. So that's kind of how I frame it here in the United States. Although we know that there's anti-Semitism, of course, within segments of minority communities here, and it's really a case by case basis, hard to contain, and maybe we shouldn't try to categorize it, actually. So, a good question.
What are your thoughts?
Let me just jump on one thing or two things that Holly mentioned. Holly mentioned the shooting in Germany on Yom Kippur. From a physical security point of view, I cannot stress this enough. The door was locked. The shooter couldn't get in. He shot at the door. There were bullet holes in the door that did not penetrate. People's lives were saved. What I have found in the 4.5 years that I have been doing this job is that we as Americans, we say, oh, you know what? It's too much trouble to lock the door. I'm going to keep it open. Oh, it's too inconvenient to our congregants. We try to find every excuse in the world not to do security. And I am telling you, from a professional out of a career in law enforcement and security, I am telling you, do not make this mistake, because you'll never know when something happens. It happens really, really fast. I stress that here. I stress that to everyone I consult with. Lock the door. If you need to figure out a way to do it to make it convenient, I will help you find that way. But if you make it harder for someone to penetrate your perimeter or your building, you may save lives. So I just wanted to make a comment on that one.
Mitchell, Holly, thank you. Those of us who are lay leaders and professionals in the Jewish community attend many forums, much like this one. I think I speak on behalf of all of us that this has been one of the most informative and useful that we've attended. My thanks to Brian Siegel and Michael Winograd from AJC. There's nothing that we can accomplish in a vacuum. Only through collaboration and partnership can we make a difference. And again, most of all, thank you to the attendees who have taken time from their busy schedule to join us. We are going to put up a slide now with contact information for Mitchell and Holly, as well as myself, if you'd like to become involved with Federation. And this is going to be the first of many collaborations, and we will also send you a link to the survey tomorrow, and so you can learn more. Thank you, everybody.